Clara Miller had 6 weeks left to save her land. If she failed, her children would lose the only home they had ever known. And if Silas Vance had his way, she would be standing in the Wyoming snow by Christmas with nothing but a red dress, 2 frightened children, and her dead husband's name on a useless deed. The wind screamed across the Wyoming plains in the autumn of 1888. Clara stood on the porch, pulling her worn wool shawl tighter around her shoulders.
Her red dress was the finest thing she owned. It was also the dress she had worn when she buried her husband. James had been gone for 6 months. He left her with 300 acres of wild land and 2 young children. He left her with a heart full of holes and a barn full of broken dreams.
The Medicine Bow Mountains stood tall and purple in the distance. Clara looked at the fence line near the old barn. The posts were leaning like tired old men. The wire was rusted, snapping under the weight of the coming winter. She didn't have the strength to fix them alone. Her hands were blistered, and her back was constantly aching.
Her son, Ben, was only 7 years old. He tried to help, but he was still just a boy. Her daughter, Sarah, was barely 5. They were inside the house, playing quietly by the hearth. They didn't know that their world was about to crumble. Clara knew the winter was coming fast. The great blizzard of earlier that year had already killed half the cattle in the territory. The school children's blizzard had left deep scars on the soul of the West. Thousands of head of livestock lay frozen in the coulees. The land was unforgiving, and the sky was turning the color of lead. But the men in town were even worse than the weather. Silas Vance was the wealthiest rancher in the valley. He was a man who measured his worth in the suffering of others. He owned the water rights to the north. He wanted Clara's land to expand his cattle empire. He had visited her 3 times since the funeral. Each time, his smile grew thinner and more predatory. His threats were no longer whispered, they were shouted. He told her a woman alone could not keep a homestead. He said the land office would revoke her claim by spring. Under the Homestead Act, she had to show improvement on the land. Silas claimed she was failing the government's test. He wanted to see her broken and begging. Clara felt a lump in her throat as she touched the cold wood of the fence.
She would not lose James's dream. She would not let her children become beggars on the streets of Cheyenne. Then she heard the rhythmic thud of a horse's hooves. A tall man on a buckskin mare rode slowly up the trail. He didn't look like the local ranchers.
He wore a dusty brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was tanned dark by 1,000 miles of sun. His eyes were the color of the Wyoming sky after a summer storm. He stopped 10 feet away and tipped his hat with a slow grace. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said.
His voice was deep and steady, like the hum of a cello. It was a voice that suggested he had seen the end of the world and survived. "I'm Elias Thorne," he continued. Clara didn't move an inch. She kept her hand near the heavy iron skillet she had left on the poor trail.
"I don't have any work for you, Mr. Thorne," she replied. Her voice was as sharp as a winter frost. "I wasn't looking for wages," Elias said. He looked at the leaning fence and the empty, sagging barn. "I heard in town that Silas Vance is making things hard for you."
Clara stiffened, her pride flaring like a struck match. "The whole town is talking, I suppose." Elias climbed down from his horse with slow, deliberate movements. He wasn't a young man, but he was built like a mountain oak. He walked to the fence and pushed on a post with one hand. It groaned and nearly collapsed under his weight. "This won't hold through a November gale," he remarked. "I know that," Clara snapped. Her pride was a shield she used to hide her paralyzing fear. Elias looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the exhaustion etched into the corners of her eyes. He saw the way her hands trembled against the fabric of her skirt. "I have a proposal for you, Mrs. Miller," he said quietly. "I'm not selling my land," she interrupted, her chin trembling. "I don't want to buy it," he replied.
He looked toward the house where the children's faces appeared at the window. They looked like two small birds waiting for a storm to pass. "I am a man with no family and no home to speak of. I have a clean record and a strong pair of hands. Vance won't stop until there is a man's name on this deed."
Clara felt a spark of white-hot anger. "So you want me to give it to you instead?" Elias shook his head slowly. "No. But men like Vance know how to twist the law against a woman alone. If another legal name stood beside yours, he would have a harder time taking this place." He stepped closer, but kept a respectful, measured distance. "Would my name protect your land?" he asked. The question hung in the air, heavy, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Clara felt her heart race against her ribs. He was suggesting a marriage of convenience.
A legal paper to keep the vultures from picking her bones. "I don't even know you," she whispered. "You know I'm not Silas Vance," Elias said. "That's a start in this part of the country." He told her he would sleep in the barn with the hay. He would work from the first light of sunrise to the last light of sunset. He would ask for nothing but a hot meal and a place for his horse. Clara looked at the mountains again. The first flakes of snow began to fall from the gray sky. They were tiny and white, like salt scattered on a wound. If she said no, she would be homeless by Christmas. If she said yes, she would be inviting a total stranger into her life. "My children come first," she said, her voice finally steady. "Always," Elias promised, and his eyes didn't flicker. They went to the circuit rider the following Tuesday. It was a cold, gray morning in the small town of Laramie. The air smelled of coal smoke and wet wool. The ceremony took exactly 5 minutes. Clara Miller became Clara Thorne on a piece of official paper. They didn't kiss. They didn't even hold hands as they walked out. Elias just signed his name in a bold, steady script that didn't waver. As they left the office, they ran into Silas Vance on the boardwalk. The rancher's face turned a deep, ugly shade of purple. "This is a sham," Silas barked, his hand going to his gun belt. "It's a legal union, Silas," Elias said calmly. He stepped in front of Clara, his broad shoulders blocking her from view. It was the first time in months she felt someone standing between her and the world. "Stay off this woman's property," Elias added. His voice had a razor's edge to it that chilled the blood. Silas spat on the boardwalk and stomped away like a defeated dog. But Clara saw the venomous look in the rancher's eyes. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning of a different war. The ride back to the farm was long and silent. When they arrived, Elias went straight to the barn without a word. He didn't ask for a tour of the house. He didn't try to sit in James's favorite chair by the fire. He took his simple bedroll and settled into the drafty hayloft. Within an hour, the sound of an axe echoed through the yard. That night, Clara lay awake in James's old room and listened to that sound in her memory. Part of her was still afraid of Elias. Another part of her felt something she had not felt since the funeral. The house no longer sounded completely empty. He was clearing deadfall from the creek. If he failed, the spring flood could tear through the lower field. Clara watched him from the kitchen window. She watched the way his muscles moved under his coat. Ben ran out to watch, the wood fly in perfect, clean arcs. At first, Clara was worried, her heart tight with motherly instinct. But she saw Elias stop and show Ben how to hold a piece of kindling. He was patient and kind. He didn't shout or grow frustrated with the boy's small hands. That night, Clara made a large pot of thick beef stew. She put a heavy plate on the porch and knocked on the wood. Elias took the plate and thanked her with a simple nod. He ate outside in the biting cold, respecting her boundaries. The town gossip started almost immediately. When Clara went to the general store, the women whispered behind their hands. They said she was desperate and had lost her mind. They said Elias was a drifter with a dark, bloody past. Some said he was a failed lawman from the plains of Kansas. Others said he had spent hard time in a territorial prison. Clara kept her head high, her dignity her only armor. She didn't care what the small-minded people said. The fence was fixed and the posts were straight. The roof was patched against the leaking rain.
The woodpile was growing higher every single day. By November, the first real blizzard of the season hit. The wind screamed like a banshee through the chimney. The temperature dropped to 20 below zero in an hour. Clara was terrified, huddled with her children under every blanket they owned.
The house creaked and groaned like a ship lost at sea. She thought about Elias out there in the freezing barn. The barn was sturdy, but it wasn't a home for a human soul. She took a lantern and pushed open the heavy front door. The snow blinded her instantly, stinging her eyes like needles.
"Elias!" she screamed into the white void. The wind swallowed her voice before it could travel 10 feet. Suddenly, a large, heavy hand grabbed her arm. It was Elias, emerging from the darkness like a ghost. He was covered in a thick layer of frost and ice.
He was carrying a newborn calf in his arms. "Get back inside," he yelled over the roar of the storm. He pushed her into the warmth of the kitchen and kicked the door shut. He set the shivering, wet calf by the dying fire. His own face was pale and ghostly with the cold.
"The mother died in the drifts," he said, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I couldn't leave the little one to freeze to death." Clara didn't think twice. She saw the man beneath the stranger. "You're staying in here tonight," she ordered. "I'll sleep by the stove," he said, not even looking for a bed. He didn't argue because he was too tired to be proud. That night, they sat in the soft glow of the dying embers. The children were asleep in the loft, safe and warm. The calf was snoring softly by the woodbox. For the first time, Elias talked about his life. He told her about the Civil War and the blood on the grass. He did not speak of it with pride, and this story does not celebrate violence. He told her about a younger sister he lost to the yellow fever. He spoke of the things he had seen in the wild, lawless West. He wasn't a criminal or a monster. He was just a man who had lost everything and forgotten how to hope. He admitted he was not always gentle. There had been years when anger lived closer to him than kindness. He had walked away from good people before they could walk away from him. That was why he knew how dangerous loneliness could become. Clara found herself telling him about James and their early years. She cried for the first time since the funeral. She cried for the crushing loneliness of a widow's life. She cried for the fear of the future that kept her awake at night. Elias didn't try to hug her or overstep. He just sat there and listened with his whole soul. Sometimes listening is the greatest gift a man can give a woman. Friends, if this frontier story is touching your heart, please subscribe for more tales of courage, family, and second chances. Because when the snow began to melt, Clara learned that peace was more fragile than she had ever imagined. By December, the house felt fundamentally different. It didn't feel like a widow's house of mourning anymore. It felt like a fortress against the world. Ben followed Elias everywhere, mimicking his long strides. The boy was learning how to trap rabbits and track the winter deer. Sarah would sit beside Elias while he carved small wooden toys. He made her a small horse with a real horsehair tail. The girls' laughter filled the rooms that had been silent for so long. But the peace was fragile, like thin ice on a pond. One afternoon, a man from the land office arrived on a black horse. He was accompanied by a smiling Silas Vance. The official looked uncomfortable, shifting in his saddle. "Mrs. Thorne," the man said, looking at his papers, "Mr. Vance has filed a formal, sworn complaint. He claims this marriage is a fraud to circumvent the homestead law." Clara felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her cold. "He says Mr. Thorne is being paid to stay here as a guard, and that he has a wife already living in Montana." The accusation hit Clara like a physical blow to the stomach. She looked at Elias, who was standing by the porch rail. His jaw was set tight, his eyes hard as flint. "Is it true, Elias?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Elias looked directly at Silas Vance. The rancher had a smug, victory-filled grin on his face. "I've never been to Montana in my life," Elias said firmly. "Prove it," Silas challenged, his voice dripping with malice.
"A drifter's word means nothing against a man of property and standing," the official sighed and looked at the ground. "There will be a hearing in town during the first week of January. If you cannot prove the legitimacy of this union, the claim will be vacated. The land will go to the highest bidder at public auction."
After they left, a heavy silence fell over the farm. Clara looked at Elias, searching for a sign of the truth. She wanted to believe him with every fiber of her being, but the doubt was a poison spreading through her mind. "Why did you really come here, Elias?" she asked. Her voice was trembling with a mix of fear and betrayal.
"I told you the day I arrived," he said. "I wanted to help a woman who was being bullied." "Nobody helps for nothing," she snapped, her grief turning to anger. "Not in this hard, bitter country." Elias looked hurt for the first time since they had met. He didn't say another word to defend himself. He simply turned and went back to the barn.
The next 2 weeks were the longest of Clara's life. She didn't invite him into the house for meals anymore. She left his plates on the porch like she was feeding a stray dog. She saw him working in the freezing rain and the sleet. More than once, she stood behind the kitchen curtain and almost called him inside. But fear held her tongue. Pride had become a wall, and every day Elias worked outside that wall in silence.
He was clearing the irrigation ditches for the spring thaw. He was working as if the land were his own flesh and blood. On Christmas Eve, Clara found Ben crying in the barn. The boy was hugging Elias's buckskin mare and sobbing into her mane. "What's wrong, Ben?" she asked, her heart breaking. "Elias is packing his old trunk," the boy sobbed. "He says he's leaving right after the hearing in town. He says you don't want him here anymore." Clara felt a sharp, agonizing pain in her chest.
She walked up to the hayloft, her boots heavy on the ladder. Elias was folding his heavy brown coat with trembling hands. His trunk was open, and his few belongings were inside. "You're leaving us?" she asked, her voice small. "You don't trust me, Clara," he said, looking at her. He used her first name for the very first time.
"A marriage without trust is just a different kind of prison. I'll go to the hearing, and I will stand for you. I'll swear my oath before the judge, and then I'll move on to where I'm not a burden." Clara looked at his hands, scarred and blistered from her land.
She looked at the wooden horse he had lovingly made for Sarah. She looked at the way her son looked at him with hero worship. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the tears finally falling. Elias didn't look up. His shoulders slumped. "I've been alone so long I forgot how to trust anyone," she continued.
"Please, don't go yet." Elias paused, his hand resting on a worn Bible in his trunk. He looked at her red dress, now worn and faded at the hem. "I'll stay until the hearing is over," he said softly.
The day of the hearing was bitterly, bone-chillingly cold. The courthouse in Laramie was packed with curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to see the widow and the drifter fail. Silas Vance sat in the front row, looking like a king on his throne. The judge was an old man with a long white beard of wisdom.
He looked at the legal papers on his cluttered desk. "Mr. Thorne," the judge began, his voice echoing in the room, "there are rumors you are an impostor and a fraud. There are rumors you have a dark criminal past in other territories." Elias stood up slowly, commanding the entire room.
He didn't look like a drifter today. He had trimmed his beard and polished his worn boots. "I served as a deputy marshal in Abilene for 6 years, Judge," Elias said. He laid a tarnished silver star on the table. Then he placed 2 folded letters beside it.
"One is from the marshal who swore me in. The other's from the church in Abilene confirming I have no wife living in Montana." The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop on the floor. "I resigned because I was tired of the killing and the blood. I came to Wyoming seeking a small piece of peace. I married Clara Miller because she was the bravest woman I ever met, and because I wanted to be part of something real again." Then, from the back of the room, Mrs. Higgins slowly stood. She was the last person Clara expected to speak. The town's sharpest gossip looked directly at Silas Vance, and for once, her tongue served the truth. Clara braced herself for a public insult or a cruel joke, but Mrs. Higgins looked at Silas Vance with pure disgust. "I saw Silas Vance's men cutting Mrs. Miller's fences last August," she said. "I saw them scaring her cattle and laughing about it. And I saw this man, Elias Thorne, fixing what they broke. He's done more for that land in 3 months than most men do in a lifetime."
The judge banged his heavy gavel with a thunderous sound. "Enough," he commanded. He looked at Silas Vance with a gaze that could wither stone. "Mr. Vance, if I hear another word of these false accusations, I will charge you. Perjury is a serious crime in this territory. The claim stands as written."
The marriage is fully recognized by the territory of Wyoming. Clara felt like she could finally breathe for the first time in years. They walked out of the courthouse as the sun peeked through the clouds. The townspeople stepped aside, their faces full of newfound respect. They weren't whispering insults anymore. They were nodding in greeting.
When they reached the wagon, Elias helped Clara up with a gentle hand, but he didn't get in beside her. He handed her the leather reins. "The land is yours, and it is safe, Clara," he said. "The papers are filed, and the deed is secure."
Vance won't trouble you or the children again." Clara stared at him, her heart sinking into her boots. "Where are you going, Elias?" "The barn is empty, and my horse is saddled," he said.
"I'll fetch my mare and head south toward the warmer air. You don't need my name to protect you anymore." The wind picked up, biting at her cheeks and bringing more snow. She looked at the man who had saved her entire family. She realized she didn't just need his name on a piece of paper. She needed his shadow on the porch every evening. She needed his quiet laughter in the warmth of the kitchen. She needed the way he looked at her when he thought she was sleeping. "Elias, wait!" she called out, her voice breaking the winter air. He stopped and turned, his expression unreadable. Clara climbed down from the wagon, ignoring the mud on her dress. She didn't care who was watching from the storefronts. She ran to him and grabbed his sleeve with both hands. "I was wrong about everything," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't want you to stay for the land or the law. I don't want you to stay because of Silas Vance." She looked deep into his blue eyes and saw his loneliness. "I'm begging you to stay for us. Stay as my husband in truth, not on a piece of paper."
"But in my heart and in this home." Tears blurred her vision and froze on her eyelashes. Even the hardest faces in the crowd softened. One old woman turned away, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. It was the kind of moment that reminded everyone why they stayed in the West. Elias reached out and wiped a stray tear from Clara's cheek.
His hand was rough and calloused, but his touch was as gentle as a prayer. "Are you sure, Clara?" he asked, his voice low. "It's a hard, bitter life out here on the plains." "It's only hard when you're facing it alone," she replied. Elias smiled, a slow, beautiful smile that finally reached his eyes.
"Then I'm home," he said, and he finally took her hand. They drove back to the Thorne farm together in the fading light. The children ran out to meet them, shouting with joy. Ben grabbed the horse's bridle like a little man. Sarah jumped into Elias's strong arms and wouldn't let go.
That evening, Clara didn't put a plate on the cold porch. She set 4 places at the sturdy kitchen table. She put a fresh, clean cloth down for the first time. She lit the good beeswax candles she had been saving.
They sat together as a real family, eating in the warmth. Outside, the Wyoming wind still howled and the snow piled high. But the fire was hot, and the door was locked tight against the dark. The red dress was finally hung up in the dark wardrobe. It was no longer a dress for burying the past. It was a dress for living a new, bright future. Over the years, the Thorne Ranch became the most successful in the valley. Elias and Clara had a daughter of their own 2 years later.
They called her Hope, for she was the bloom of their struggle. Silas Vance eventually lost his holdings to debt and moved away in shame. But the story of the widow and the drifter stayed behind. It became a legend whispered in the Medicine Bow Mountains, a story about how a name can protect a house from the wind, but only love and sacrifice can make it a home. I hope this story brought a tear to your eye and a smile to your heart. What would you have done if you were in Clara's worn shoes? Would you have trusted a mysterious stranger to save your legacy? Please share your thoughts and your own family stories in the comments. I love reading your accounts of strength and female resilience. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if it touched you today. It really helps our small channel grow and reach more souls like yours. This story is a dramatized frontier tale inspired by the spirit of old Western history, family hardship, and second chances. Some characters and events have been fictionalized for storytelling and educational value. Any difficult themes are included with care, and this story does not glorify violence, cruelty, or harm to children. Some images in this video may be created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. Thank you for spending this quiet time with us on the old frontier. In our next story, a lonely school teacher in the Black Hills discovers that the man everyone fears may be the only one willing to protect her. You will not want to miss that tale of courage, trust, and unexpected love. Until then, keep your own fire burning and cherish those you love. Goodbye for now, and may your heart always find its way home.